that are all brand new. We do have the family borrowing, and this is why I'm really passionate about setting this up and making sure that families have got more option to more books. So you can set up your family borrowing, and then you can actually borrow, you know, sort of even up to 10, even more if you feel that that's what you need, and have them in your house for, you know, a week, 2 weeks, and then you can bring them back and swap them. So it's another way of having a lot more texts in your house that your children have chosen and had choice around, rather than having to fork out lots of money. Because if your children are anything like mine, my son read the latest Minecraft book from Big W. By the time I got home, he'd read it. And I thought, oh, well, that was $6 well spent. Let's donate that to the library. So we can't, sometimes they pump through lots and we just can't keep up with that. It's not economical, but that's what we've got our library for. This is a big one, where we revisit the books that they love. I Went Walking. Some people might think, oh, I think we read that in preschool, that's like my child read that at daycare and they did that as the big book. Do you know this book, I Went Walking, What Do You See? And all the different animals. And this is a well-loved book. This is a book that will be available for the K-2 children to take home as home reading. Why? Because it's a well-loved book that they're familiar with, and now they can probably read it themselves. And they'll use that knowledge from before when someone read it to them, and they loved it, and it has that rhythm and that repetition, and it keeps on saying, I went walking, what did you see? Now we know that. I can read this book without looking at it. But now we can tap into, I went walking. And we can actually look at what the word I is, and we can look at the word went, and we look at the word walking, and they can become familiar with that and the actual words now. Okay, and that's when we, you know, people, should we finger point? When do they stop finger pointing? Finger pointing is powerful in individual situations, and this is one of them. When they know what it says already, so now we're narrowing the focus down into actually matching the word with the text. And that's a really good way of doing that as well. Also, I mean, this book is great for prediction and other strategies like that. When it's a familiar text, prediction goes out the window, but doesn't help us. But we can look at the clues and things that how we know. And then it's sequencing. Oh, you know what the next animal is going to be. Do you already know all the things they're going to see before we even read it? What comes first? What comes second? So we're using all those reading strategies and all those language of things like retell, sequencing, which when they get into the high grades and they're looking at being a writer and they are writing that, they already have a really strong understanding of what a retell is before we then ask them to write their own retell. And it's because they can relate back and connect to these amazing books that they're familiar with. The bottom one, if your child is reluctant to read or is disinterested in the book, this is really challenging. We need to look at why. What is it? So, is it the pressure of reading aloud? Is it tiredness? Is it something that you're not able to identify, but they're just really unengaged in the book? That is a big question, but I think a lot of that is straight away alleviated by the fact that they have choice. They've connected to it and they're feeling motivated to it. However, this is something that I am definitely available to support people with in one-on-one situations. Now that the children coming up to the library regularly, I'm becoming more aware of individual children, their interests and what they're engaging with. So I'm always available for, you know, one-on-one conversations about supporting your child with that. And if we have interest in that, I can always run a more specific workshop around that. So when we have our feedback sheet that we'll just ask you to fill in at the end, I know everyone hates doing that, but it is really valuable. If that is something that you would be interested in, just jot that down and we can look at having that as well, because then I can really hone into more specific issues that you might be finding or specific things that you're finding challenging, and we can look at targeting that. One thing about me is I'm very much into individualised things, so I'm not going to stand up here and say this works for every child, because you know it doesn't and I know it doesn't, but these are a whole range of things that can support, and we can have more conversation about individual stuff if need be. Alrighty, let's get to the actual reading part now. mentioned before, if we put a book in front of a child and say, read this please, it's reading aloud time, we're doing home learning time, read it aloud to me. One, they might not be ready to do that, either emotionally or just that panic of now I have to read aloud. So what we always need to do, and I strongly encourage this, is taking a minute or two for the child to skim read. So what that means is they don't have to sit there and read the whole book themselves, and they might go, oh, I've got to read it myself, then I've got to read it to you. No, that's not what we're doing. We're skimming through and we're having a look. This provides opportunity for the children to have a look at the pictures, and even for a familiar text, just get their mind, back focused on this book that we're about to read. Okay, so skim reading is really powerful, and we have a little discussion. Now, in teacher talk, this is called like a book orientation, and we might go through really specific things and use it as an explicit teaching moment. For home learning, it's really just a discussion and getting them talking. So about, whoa, that was awesome tower. Do you want to take your tower just up the back of the out there? That would be so good. They're beautiful, those boxes, aren't they? So, type of book. So, like, oh, have you got a storybook today? Is this a storybook? Oh, I wonder if this is going to have rhyming words in it. Or is it like a poetry book? Is this an information book that you've brought home? That type of book. In library lessons, I'm doing a lot of talk around types of books and purpose of books. So, this is a fiction book or a story book. And then we have graphic novels, and we have chapter books, we have information books, all of that sort of thing. So that just really gets them thinking about what type of book it is. You can also get them to have a think and go, oh, are there any words you want me to help you with before we start? Because even with a familiar book, there are words that we might not, the child knows, oh, I always get that word wrong, I can never think of that. So they might ask you that first, and you might say, oh yeah, that word there is quiet. Quiet. So you're just giving them the heads up of that. The characters' names. Names are so hard. Okay, I struggle with that on a daily basis. Pronouncing names correctly. Does it mean I can't read? No. Let's give them the names. So this is Pearl Barley and Charlie Parsley. They go, oh, yeah, I love that book. So give them the names of the people. We're not going to judge whether they can read a book or not based on whether they know the characters' names. It also allows you to connect. Oh, do you know which one is which? Those sorts of things, and talking about the character. And again, connecting. Oh, I read this book when I was younger. Oh, I love this book. I remember when you were in preschool and you acted that out. Let's make a connection. Oh, they've got a duck. You know, Grandma's got a duck at her house. What noise does duck make? Oh yeah, so we're just getting discussions. We're just not saying, read. We're talking about it and we're making connections with them. Oh, I wonder what other animals there might be. You could also talk about authors. Okay, so this amazing author, Matt Cosgrove, this is now the third book in the series. Okay, so you might talk about that. Did we borrow this one last week? Do you remember about that one? I wonder if it's got the same characters. Is that, oh, that is Macca. Macca was in another book. Okay, so we're connecting about topics, about characters, lots of different opportunity to have a discussion. Have we started reading yet? Have we started reading? Yeah, we have. We haven't read any of the words inside, but all of this is part of reading. Okay? Oh, I knew that was going to happen. Let's see if I can make that go back. Okay, there's different types of reading. Different ways that you can read with your child. And at home is the perfect opportunity in a one-on-one situation where you can practice and develop these. So there's the I read and then you read, where you take turns and you might read a word at a time, a sentence, a paragraph at a time, and you take it in turns. They're often very tired at the end of the day, and so this is a nice way of actually reading together, and that's totally fine, okay? The echo read is where you read a little bit and they actually repeat it after you. And you think, is that really reading? Are they really reading that book? Yeah, they are, because you're modelling how to read that. So when that character is, moo, says the cow. Lucky I said cow. And then you say, moo, says the cow. And then they go, moo, says the cow. You've just modelled how to show expression in your reading. And quite often we say expression, expression, and they go, moo, said the cow. But the said the cow bit doesn't need to have the expression. That's the narrator part. So they often need that modelled. So the echo read is really powerful for that as well, and particularly when characters are talking, that is a great strategy. And reading along together, actually saying, would you like me to read with you? And you can read the book more than once, obviously, so maybe the first time through you might read together. And the idea is that as the fluent reader, you read just a little bit more ahead, so they're with you, but you are helping them out with that. All right, unknown words is a big one. Before I do the unknown words, I just want to show you this book. Because sometimes we need to change our perspective around what is reading. And sometimes we get very stuck and very focused in on the decoding of words and how they read unknown words and wanting strategies to read those particular words. I want to show you this book now. And I'm just going to flip through it. I'm going to go fairly quickly, but I want you to have a look at each page. I'm only going to show you part of it, but the end is so amazing that I just have to go to the end. Give you a minute to think about that experience. Did you read that book? Could you understand while you were looking at those pictures that there was a story? Did I tell you what was happening? Did I read a single word? No. So this is a wordless picture book. They're incredibly powerful. In the past, people have kind of shied away from them, thinking that it's not really reading. But this one is a perfect example of how you can read a story purely by using the pictures alone. And there are lots of more of these coming. So I just read that today just to really highlight that we don't have to be so focused on decoding individual words to understand the story. And that we can gain a lot from the pictures. One of the frequently asked questions that I often get is, well, they're just looking at the pictures. They're just looking at the pictures, so they're not really reading it. Well, one of the strategies of reading is actually using our picture cues. So that is really important strategy for them to use. However, the unknown words is still a really big part of reading, so I'm not dismissing that completely. I'm just saying that there is more to it than just that. So when the readers don't know a word, there are three kind of stages here. We always pause. The pause is so powerful. The pause lets the children have process time. We tend to want to jump in and come up with helping them or saving them because we as adults think, if I just paused when I was reading out loud, I would become anxious. People wouldn't think I know how to read. The pause for children is really powerful. When I'm working with children that are, looking at an intervention lens, I had to train myself to count to 10 in my mind before I helped them. So the next part is I prompt. and I say, would you like some help? Sometimes I'll say, no, I'm just trying to think of it, or I'm working out what strategy I'm going to use. Sometimes I'll go, yes, just help me. And that's when you can select a strategy, which will be the next slide, and looking at some of those strategies. So we go pause, we prompt, and then we praise when they apply one of their strategies. If they're getting really frustrated and upset, we just tell them. We don't want it to be a negative experience, but this is something because once you start doing that pause and you start offering the prompt, they become a lot more self-sufficient with working out what to try. And at school, we are explicitly teaching these strategies, okay? So, prompting the child. We've got 6 main things here. We can prompt them to look at the picture cues. So sometimes when it might be a word that they're unsure of and it looks like quite a technical word, but there is a picture there to support it, it becomes an easier word to read. Chunking the sounds together, so that is sort of like your old sound out kind of strategy, but we look at those blends and the chunks of the parts of the word. So that is one of our strategies. That's probably one that you're most familiar with from your own experiences. Go back and rereading the sentence. Sometimes we get stuck on something, and this is why the familiar books are good, because then they reread it and they've got back in that flow and they go, oh yes, it's walking, because the book is I went walking. So rereading and going back, and then I went walking. Oh, I do, know that word now. Skipping the word and reading on. So sometimes if we continue the sentence, and we do this as adults all the time without necessarily realising that it is called the read-on strategy. So you just skip it and you keep going, and you still can understand the sentence, but then you realise, oh, that's what that word was. Okay, so, like the giraffe, the word's giraffe, the giraffe was really tall. Okay, we look at they don't know the word giraffe, we look at our picture cue, they might get it from that. We can then reread with the something was really tall. Oh, I reread, of course it's the giraffe. So now I go back and I realise that that word I didn't know was actually giraffe, because I know that sentence. Asking them, would that make sense? So when they say something like, he runned, he might say runned instead of ran, or the child might say runned, and then you say, oh, does that make sense? And then, oh no, it must be ran. So because they looked at the R, they looked at the initial letter, they knew it was about running, but they've said runned. Makes sense? Oh no, what else could it be? We reread. Sometimes you link them together, and then he ran. And then we look at the N sound. Makes sense, it is ran. So all of these reading strategies, there will be an opportunity for us to delve into these more specifically. So on your feedback sheet again, if you're able to write down that these are the types of strategies that you would like more information on, if you add that to your feedback sheet, we can look at having that as another workshop as well. At the end, or even, mostly it's at the end, but sometimes during it works as well, but we want the children to be reading for meaning, and actually having that checking of understanding and that comprehension time at the end. So, like I've said, without disrupting the flow, sometimes we might have, oh, I wonder why the character did that. I wonder why that happened. And sometimes you can check that they're actually understanding what's happening. Because sometimes the books that we read have a lot of implied meaning. If we just get to the end and they haven't understood it, maybe back we could, be checking and kind of, and then we have a little discussion and then we continue reading. There are some prompting questions here. Again, this is on the handout. But asking those questions that are starting the discussion. So moving away from who was your favourite character, did you like this book, and actually checking in with their opinion. What do you think about? I wonder why the character did this. What could happen next? So the chalk book, that would be a perfect one for saying, what do you think could happen next? And then that links in with our readers as writers, because all of a sudden a child says, oh, I'm going to write or draw what happens next. And, so that sparks curiosity and interest and motivation for writing. Do you think it was a good ending? I must admit, I'm always one of those people that reads the book and goes, I could think of a way better ending than that. This should have happened. You know, adult books as well, but I always have a really strong opinion about the ending. And often kids do too. So having that opportunity to talk about that, what better way for your child to say, this should have happened, for you to check their comprehension and understanding. Obviously, they've understood it if they think they've got a better solution or a better way of ending the book, okay? So rather than what colour was the character's hat, what character was, or, you know, things like that, this opens the door to so much more understanding and discussion. What else could happen and what could make this book better? So, I know I've been talking for a long time. This was just, again, from Stephen Lane about parents of successful readers. And there is a lot of data to show about how your child is positively impacted by you doing some of these quite simple things. We also have in our handout today, in the last sheet, is just showing some statistics around the positive impact of reading, and reading a little bit each day, and then reading a little bit more and a little bit more. So really taking that time in our busy lives, I promise you it's time well invested. We just have to put it to the forefront of our mind and just have it there as a priority. Because when you see this, how can it not be a priority? Okay? Alrighty. There's lots of other further resources that you might be interested in. This table up here, these are all of my personal books, but I am happy for you to take a photo of the cover. I'm happy for you to flick through them. They're all available, you know, book depository, different places that you might want to borrow. You can see, I'm not making this up. These are my tags of my, you know, pages that I love. This one, I have a couple of copies that I can lend out through the library. These I just picked up at the extra copies at the Lifeline Book Fair, one of my favourite places to go. But it talks about Mem Fox as well, and some of her experience, well, it's written by Mem Fox, some of her experiences with children and what got her on this journey. She's not a teacher, she's an author, but moving into writing the types of books that she does for parents to connect with their children, to have those familiar texts, when reading really is reading, when we've thought that they're not reading the same book over and over again. And all of these things that I have talked about today, I didn't make any of it up. It's all based in research. It's all based and come from knowledgeable people, okay, around reading. But if you do have any questions on particular things, because you're like, I'm not sure why you've said that, or I don't know if I, you know, sit on the same, I'm not on the same wavelength as you with that, I'm totally happy to talk about any of this one-on-one or in another group situation. These ones are more teacher text type things, but there's so many valuable parts in it. Even if you want to have a look, flick through, I'm happy to help you get hands on a chapter or something as well. So I'm just going to look at some of my frequently asked questions. I think I've answered a few of these already, but I wanted to make sure that I did cover them. So if you want to just have a little look there about covering the pictures. A big question that we often get is, why aren't we sending home levelled readers? Okay, and I hope that through this talk you have a better understanding of why we're sending home quality literature. Now, levelled readers are brilliant, don't get me wrong. I use them on a daily basis, but I use them for instructional use. I use them for a one-on-one situation or a small group situation. They're great because they help us target children with sight words at that child's level or just above, so that we're helping to move them on, okay? So as an instructional tool, they're great, but they don't match our purpose of home reading. Our purpose for home reading is fostering a love of reading, and they don't always do that, okay? They're not necessarily connecting into your interest child. They're your child's interest. They're not motivating, okay? So they don't, that is why we don't use the home readers, the levelled readers for the home reading. One, they're about correcting them if they're wrong, and that's another really important one. So sometimes they're like, well, they've said the wrong word. They've said the giraffe put the cup on the sink, but the word was mug. And I would suggest there that you don't interrupt that. The meaning's there. It's not the right word, but it makes sense. If they'd said, something completely different, a plate, then you might say, hey, was that a plate? And then you actually revisit that after your reading. So you don't interrupt that flow of them understanding what is happening, but then after that, so when you said that word cup, it was a cup, but let's have a look what the word was. It didn't actually say cup, it said mug. And I know it says mug now because it's got the sound at the front. Oh yeah, so you're not telling them you're wrong because they were right. It was a cup or a mug. They just didn't decode that exact word correctly. So then we revisit that word at the end. And again, do I tell them a word if they don't know it? We covered that a little bit in the unknown words part. But pause, prompt a strategy, give praise. If they're getting frustrated, tell them. Okay, because then maybe next time they'll know.